The Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs will come to order. Aloha and welcome to today's hearing of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. Today, we'll focus on how the Departments of Veterans Affairs and Defense respond to in-service exposures. As a committee charged with oversight of the Department of Veterans Affairs, we must be certain that VA is providing appropriate health care and compensation to those who are harmed by exposures while serving in the military. In order for VA to do that, DoD must first determine who was exposed, what they were exposed to, and the health consequences of such exposures. The information must then be shared with VA. Two other matters we'll look at today relate to claimed exposure of members of the armed forces during the current conflicts. The other two involve claimed exposures in the past and relate not only to members of the armed forces, but also to family members. These are very different issues and as such require different approaches. The question of who might have been exposed in the present conflicts, current DoD records should be available to answer that question. If they are not, then the committee must know why not. For the earlier exposures, DoD must pull together records to provide some estimation of potentially exposed populations. On the overall issue of providing information on exposures, I believe that it is vital that DoD commit to ensuring that going forward, no one will leave active duty without both a comprehensive physical that might identify any health concerns related to possible in-service exposures and a detailed record of where the individual was stationed. VA's role is to merge the information regarding potential exposure and the scientific analysis so as to craft an appropriate response. This effort must be carried out giving the benefit of the doubt to the veterans concerned. In some cases, there has been an absence of reliable information on exposures, including health consequences. In other cases, it is not possible to achieve consensus on the science. One thing is clear. Those harmed by an in-service exposure to environmental hazards should receive a timely and appropriate response from the government. Because Congress is not the ideal forum for seeking to resolve complex and often emotional issues related to potential exposures, we must be sure that DoD and VA are working together effectively on such issues. I look forward to the testimony of the many witnesses that we have here this morning. Senator Burr, for your opening statement.
Aloha, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. I want to thank you for calling what I think is an extremely important hearing. I want to welcome our witnesses and to recognize all of the veterans and their family members who have joined us here today for this hearing. I also want to give special welcome to two North Carolinians, Jerry Ensminger and Shelley Perulis, and to thank them for their tireless leadership and advocacy on behalf of the veterans and their families. Your interest in this hearing only serves to underscore the importance of the issues we're discussing today. Over the years, thousands of military personnel and their families have been exposed to dangerous chemicals where they were living and working while serving our country. Today, we'll hear from some of those exposures, including the plumes from an incinerator near a base in Japan, smoke from burn pits being used in Iraq and Afghanistan, dust from a facility in Iraq coated with a known carcinogen, and contaminated drinking water at a base in North Carolina. I want to express my sincere appreciation to the veterans and family members on our first panel for your willingness to share with us your painful experiences about that exposure. Your perspective will help guide our efforts to find answers for veterans across the country about how these exposures may have affected their health or the health of their loved ones. More importantly, your testimony will help us determine what steps we need to take to protect and improve the lives of those who have been harmed. As we'll discuss today, there are many other veterans and their families who may have been exposed to dangerous chemicals in other places around the world. For all of them, it's important that we have a framework in place to determine in a fair and hassle-free and timely manner what benefits and services they need and deserve. To that end, we'll have a candid and productive discussion today about what's currently working well and where improvements are needed. Mr. Chairman, for veterans and their families put at risk by exposure, whether in Japan, Afghanistan, Iraq, or North Carolina, we have a solemn duty to take care of those who have were put in harm's way while serving this nation. I hope we will work together, and I think we will, to provide these veterans, their families, with the answers they deserve and, more importantly, the help they need. I thank the Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Burr. Now we'll have the opening statement of Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Burr and Senator Hagan, too, for your good work on this very important issue. Today's hearing is about toxic exposure, elusive science, and earned compensation. It's about our service members and their families and how we resolve the difficult challenges that exposure issues present. When there's doubt, we must take the side of the service member. Connecting the dots between service and exposure is a complicated process. Helping these families should not be complicated. In tough cases like this, we have to ask ourselves, what is the greater sin? Do we refuse benefits to a service member or a veteran or a service member's family or a veteran's family who may be suffering from service-connected exposure to cancerous toxins? Do we provide benefits to a service member or veteran or service member's family or veteran's family whose health care challenges may not be service-connected? Do we save a few bucks or do we save a few lives? Scientific certainty shouldn't trump human decency. There's another point here that can't be overlooked. Our military now is working to connect the dots, but private contractors are not. From the exposures at Camp Lejeune to the burn pits in Iraq to the emissions at Atsugi Naval Air Station, we found a military working to find the answers. It hasn't been the smoothest journey to where we are today. For too long, the Department of Defense fought and denied exposure claims, but the military, again, finally now is working with the VA to serve the best interests of our service members, our veterans, and I hope their families. I spoke this week with the Marine Commandant, General James Conway, who has pledged his cooperation and has pledged that the military will do much better at meeting its obligations than it has in the past. As we consider how to ensure members of our military who've been harmed by environmental hazards to make sure that we consider how to ensure that they receive the benefits they deserve, we should learn from the rocky road former nuclear workers have been forced to travel to prove they have been harmed by their jobs. The Department of Labor is charged with addressing work-connected health care issues affecting our former nuclear workers, many of whom are in my home state of Ohio. It's been an unjustifiably steep, red tape-ridden battle for these workers, and I welcome my colleagues' assistance and efforts to improve that program. We mustn't repeat the mistakes of that program as we address the concerns of service members. We must cut through the bureaucracy and focus on delivering both help and hope to men and women and their families who served our nation and now are suffering because of it. That's why the work of this committee and the leadership of the chairman and the ranking member on this issue are so important. And that's why the testimony of our witnesses is so vital and appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Brown. I want to now welcome our first panel this morning. We also have Laurie Paganelli, who will testify in regard to the Atsugi Naval Air Facility in Japan. She will be followed by Dr. Charles Feigley, who is a professor at the University of South Carolina and is also the chair of the subcommittee on the Atsugi Incinerator for the National Resource Council. Now we will receive the testimony of Ms. Paganelli.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to present my testimony on behalf of my family and as a representative for hundreds of sailors, Marines, and civilians who were unknowingly exposed and have been adversely affected by contaminated air, soil, and water at U.S. Navy Air Facility Atsugi, Japan. My name is Laurie Paganelli, and I'm a former resident of Atsugi. My husband was active duty Navy service member, and we were given orders to report to Atsugi in 1997. Our tour of duty was from 1997 to 2000. Our only son, Jordan, was 5 years old when we arrived. While stationed at Atsugi, he attended Shirley Lanham Elementary School, played soccer, t-ball, attended many sporting cultural events throughout our time there. On January 11th, 2008, our lives changed forever. Jordan, then 16 years old, was diagnosed with a rare, vicious, and highly aggressive form of cancer, so aggressive, in fact, that by the time he displayed any symptoms, his cancer had already progressed to stage 4. The name of his cancer is alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma, as known short ARMS. ARMS is considered extremely rare, and there are only about 350 cases each year in the United States. And because of its rarity, severe lack of funding there's a severe lack of funding for this type of cancer. Only 3% of research money goes towards childhood cancer research, making the 5-year survival rate dismally low. Jordan's protocol was an intensive multi-agent therapy, including dose compressed cycles, which had us calling Walter Reed Army Medical Center home for most of the 15 months of continuous treatment. Jordan also battled through 12 total weeks of daily radiation, 7 weeks to his torso and lungs, and then 5 more weeks to his entire head following the discovery of additional cancerous lesions that had spread to his brain. Additionally, due to cancer-based damage to his hips, he spent 10 months on crutches and the rest with a cane. Quite the contrast to the young boy who played at Atsugi base and the high school cross-country star he had been just months earlier. During our stay at Atsugi, we were aware of the incinerator. It smelled, burned our eyes, and sometimes added a greenish glow to the air around us. We certainly were not aware of the effects it would have on our family years later. As most military families do, I trusted that the Navy wouldn't let us live somewhere that was a danger to our health. I was wrong. From 1983 to 2001, sufficient and compelling evidence showed that the blend of highly toxic chemicals were released from the Shinkampo Incinerator complex, labeled SIC, at levels that far exceeded the EPA's health risk-based guidelines. These chemicals severely contaminated the residential area of Atsugi. A partial list of chemicals include volatile organic compounds, polychlorinated biphenyls, pesticides, polycyclic, excuse my pronunciations, aromatic hydrocarbons, dioxins, furans, particulates, and heavy metals. In 1990, U.S. Department of the Navy documents referred to this plume of smoke as, quote, witch's brew of toxic chemicals, unquote. During the operation of SIC, the Navy spent approximately $18 million performing numerous ambient air and health studies at Atsugi. The data repeatedly confirmed that Atsugi was being polluted, and carcinogenic and non-carcinogenic chemicals may, of which be categorized as by the EPA to have long latency periods, meaning that the effects would be evident years after exposure. In 1997, the Navy began to communicate health risks to Atsugi residents. However, during the initial 12 years of incinerator operations, personnel had little to no knowledge of the potential health risks and toxic exposures. In risk and a review of the Navy's human risk assessment of Atsugi, prepared in 2001 by the Committee of Toxicology, stated, quote, "There does not seem to have been a coordinated strategy for risk communication," unquote. In 1997, risk communication efforts included instructions for residents and school children to stay indoors while the plume of toxins blew towards the base. A standard Form 600 was added to personnel medical records, stating that we were exposed to 12 toxic chemicals and exceeded the maximum contamination levels. Although the Navy had no control over the missions of the SIC, they did have the ability to avoid exposing thousands of children to toxic chemicals. By 1990, the base residents were being exposed to dioxin and other toxic chemicals. In 1997, the Navy Inspector General reported that, quote, "The Navy must act decisively to reduce personnel exposure to incinerator contaminants. A range of options to accomplish this include, but not limited to, moving U.S. personnel to other locations must be examined," unquote. The 1999 study conducted by government of Japan and the U.S. Navy found dioxin levels in the air to be dangerously high. By 2000, Defense Secretary William Cohen and Chief of the Japanese Defense Agency agreed that Japan would provide temporary off-base housing and that Japan would not object to the U.S. government's efforts to sue SIC for violating of environmental laws. In 2001, the United States Department of Justice brought suit against private incinerator in Yokohama court. A lawsuit claimed that toxic chemicals severely polluted the air, soil, and groundwater and interfered with U.S. government rights of property and possession. The SIC was closed when the government of Japan decided to pay the incinerator owner the equivalent of $42 million to shut down, dismantle the incinerators. The Navy had knowledge that Atsugi residents were being exposed to dioxin in the SIC emissions in the early 1990s, and they knew what detrimental effects such exposure would have to the human body. As you remember, dioxin is what made Agent Orange so toxic. So it's no surprise that by 1998, the Navy recognized their liability and instituted one-page waiver that did not convey any information of known long-term risk associated with the SIC. We were required to sign the waiver. In 2007, after complaints of former residents, the Navy provided a public website with some study-based information. However, the website has not been widely publicized, and many former Atsugi residents do not have knowledge of its existence. Recently, the Navy stated that the 2009 Atsugi Health Study produced a registry. However, the study confirms that approximately 75% of the Atsugi population in the study was lost to follow-up, which adversely affects the study's end result, specifically because of the documented latency period of toxic exposure. Over the last 3 years, an estimated 750 former residents, including retired and former active duty personnel and their families, have come together for support outside the realm of the Navy. Within this group, at least 61 cancer cases have been reported, all of which have been directly associated with dioxin exposure. They include brain, thyroid, cervical, ovarian, colorectal, leukemia, lymphoma, and various other cases of sarcoma, many of which involve innocent children, like our son Jordan, who lived at Atsugi while their mothers and fathers faithfully served the United States of America while stationed in Japan. Besides cancer, many former residents suffer from illnesses including nervous system disorders, liver and kidney damage, autoimmune diseases, neurological disorders, cardiac irregularities, and other toxic-related diseases as defined by the Agency of Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. In closing, I would like to state that I had the basic human right not to be exposed to the types of toxic chemicals that were highly prevalent at Atsugi, our military members are proud to dedicate their lives in defense of this great country, and we support them in their mission every day. However, we trusted the Navy to provide safe environment for our family members, but they failed to do so, knowingly housing our families in a toxic waste zone. We look to you, committee members, to rectify this gross misconduct and to take action to ensure that the VA is provided with an appropriate registry and an accurate list of cancer and non-cancerous illnesses associated with the SIC. We urge you to ensure that all former residents are notified. Finally, we urge you to introduce a bill to enact a new law that allows former Atsugi residents and dependents to receive appropriate VA benefits to include medical care and disability compensation. My son has been fighting for his life, and the journey so far I wouldn't wish on any parent or family. We will never know if this disease was caused or brought about by the exposure of the toxin chemicals at Atsugi. However, the risk imposed to him and my family and lack of proactive risk mitigation is an absolute tragedy. I pray that no other family has to endure the pain of watching their child fight for their lives. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Paganelli. Now we'll receive the testimony of Dr. Feigley.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for your concern about the health of veterans. My name is Charles Feigley. I'm professor of environmental health sciences at the University of South Carolina Arnold School of Public Health. I'm also principal investigator of a DoD-sponsored contract testing the use of copper in air conditioning systems to improve air quality and reduce illness in the military. As well, I'm a principal investigator of the University of South Carolina Center for Public Health Preparedness, which is funded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We assist state and local tribal health agencies and their community partners to prepare for a wide range of public health emergencies. In addition, I have served on a number of committees of the National Research Council, or NRC, including as chair of the NRC subcommittee that prepared the report titled Review of the U.S. Navy's Health Risk Assessment of the Naval Air Facility at Atsugi. The National Research Council is an operating arm of the National Academy of Sciences, not part of the government, it was established in 1863 by Congress and under President Lincoln to advise the government on matters of science and technology. I'm here before you today because of my experience as a volunteer serving on that NRC committee. The NRC report titled Review of the U.S. Navy's Health Risk Assessment of the Naval Air Facility at Atsugi was prepared in response to requests from the U.S. Navy for an independent review of the final draft of the Navy Environmental Health Center's report on the risk assessment at Atsugi, and that was in 2000, the year 2000. The NEHC, that is the Naval Environmental Health Center that prepared the risk assessment report that we reviewed, had conducted a risk assessment because of concerns that were raised by residents of Atsugi, the U.S. Navy personnel and their families regarding health effects of what came to be called Envirotech Incinerator, the Envirotech Incinerator, formerly called Shinkampo or Jinkampo Incinerator Complex. That complex was adjacent to the U.S. Naval Air Facility, which is located southwest of Tokyo. And when I say adjacent, one of the critical things that really is not mentioned in my written statement is that the incinerator is at a much lower elevation than the base facility, and the stacks from the incinerator discharge just above the level of the Naval Air Facility, so that when the wind is blowing, as it frequently is from the incinerator to the base, they were directly downwind and at really pretty much the same level as discharge. The concerns were related to the exposure to emissions from the incinerator and to chemicals resulting from the storage, handling, and disposal of waste material at the facility. The risk assessment was conducted after a previous NRC committee recommended that a comprehensive health study at NAF Atsugi be conducted. The NRC subcommittee on Atsugi consisted of members selected for their expertise in toxicology, epidemiology, industrial hygiene, engineering, exposure assessment, and risk assessment. And we were specifically asked to do two things. This is our charge. Review the adequacy of the methods used to assess risk, the uncertainties identified, the risks to susceptible subpopulations such as pregnant women and young children, and the scientific validity of the conclusions drawn. Secondly, to recommend research to fill data gaps and options for mitigating risks associated with exposure to the incinerator emissions. It is important to note that you can see from these, as you can see from these specific tasks, that the subcommittee was not asked to determine the potential health effects from the incinerator, but to review the assessment that was conducted by the Naval Environmental Health Center. In its review, the subcommittee identified a number of aspects of the risk assessment that were exemplary and others that needed improvement. The subcommittee noted that the NEHC risk assessment included a rigorous quality assurance and quality control program, and the subcommittee therefore had confidence in the accuracy of the data collected. The subcommittee was pleased with the broad number of air pollutants that were monitored and the collection of meteorological data. It also commended the NEHC for calculating risks of acute and chronic toxicity endpoints of the different subpopulations. The subcommittee was concerned, however, about inconsistencies in the objectives of the risk assessment, some technical aspects regarding how the collected data was used in the risk assessment, and the interpretation of data and risk assessment findings by the NEH. The subcommittee also commented on the lack of analysis and characterization of uncertainty in the risk assessment. The subcommittee concluded that the NEH had collected a large amount of sampling data at NAF Atsugi. If analyzed and interpreted appropriately, those data might have been adequate to determine whether the air pollution at NAF Atsugi poses a health risk and how much the incinerator facility contributes to that pollution. However, the analyses of the data were inadequate to draw conclusions about the health risks of the persons residing at NAF Atsugi and about the contributions of the incinerator to those. In addition, the NEHC had interpreted some of the results of the risk assessment without taking into account the meaning and limitations of the risk assessment process. The subcommittee concluded that aspects of the analyses and interpretation of the data, not the underlying data themselves, constituted the main limitation of the risk assessment. The committee provided recommendations to improve the NEH risk assessment, including recommendations for the planning of the risk assessments, determination of attributable risk, analysis of air monitoring data, interpretation of risk assessment, treatment of uncertainty and information gaps that should be filled, and improvements in the presentation and organization of the NEH draft summary report itself. Given the aforementioned limitations of the Navy's risk assessment draft summary report, the subcommittee found that the analyses presented did not determine reliably whether military personnel and their families incurred health risk by living at NAF Atsugi. nor did the analyses represent reliably the contribution of the incinerator to those health risks. With that, I would once again thank you for inviting me to testify before this committee. I appreciate the important work that the committee does for Veterans Affairs, and welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Feigley. I would like to say thank you again to our first panel. Many of you have given heartfelt testimony regarding some very, very personal issues that have affected your lives. I know I speak for the entire committee, members of this committee, when I say that we appreciate your presence here today. I'd like to ask my question to 4 of our witnesses, Ms. Partain, Ms. Pennington, Ms. Paganelli, and Mr. Powell. Are you satisfied with the military's response to each of the exposures you or your family member was affected by, including high-risk lists, high-risk health problems? Ms. Paganelli?
Thank you. I would say, on behalf of Atsugi residents or past Atsugi residents, no, because I really strongly believe there needs to be a accurate registry, and so many families are not informed. I just really would like there to be a registry for these families and benefits for those who further down the line need them. Some acknowledgement for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Burr, for your questions, and we'll follow that with Senator Rockefeller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Feigley, your subcommittee was asked to review the adequacy of the methods used to assess risks, the uncertainties identified, the risk to susceptible subpopulations such as pregnant women and young children, the scientific validity of the conclusions drawn, number 1. Number 2, recommend opinion on the evaluation, research to fill data gaps, and options for mitigating the risk associated with exposure to incinerator emissions. Was the NRC subcommittee asked to review the final NEHC report?
No, not to my knowledge. Now I'll have to pass that off to some other folks back here from the NRC, but our committee was not asked. Let me put it that way.
So the subcommittee's recommendations, you don't know whether any or all of the recommendations were taken into account from the draft report to the final report?
I did not.
Okay. Let me ask you, if you contracted with the NRC, if you weren't on the subcommittee and you were going to contract with the NRC for that particular site, would you have limited the NRC review to the scope that the subcommittee was limited to?
No. And in fact, I think we say in the report that we thought that the Navy should have used the NRC to review their plans for doing their sampling. We recommended they do a comprehensive sampling at the base, a comprehensive risk assessment. However, I think they should have asked us being NRC. No, I'm not part of NRC, but I'm just a volunteer. But I think they should have asked NRC to actually review their plans for doing the sampling, because then I think a lot of the things that we had the negative things that we said about their report would have been said before they did the study, and we could they could have corrected them.
Therefore, it's pretty difficult to believe that you could go back and reconstruct without reviewing in total the risk.
There are some bright spots in what we saw that we thought perhaps further analysis might have revealed, especially some of the air quality modeling and the correlation between air quality modeling and the measurements that they did on the facility that
Me, if I
could have
could.
revealed some things.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the witnesses in the first panel for sharing your personal experiences with us today. And again, this will be helpful to this committee, and we look forward to dealing with these problems that have been mentioned. Thank you very much again, and I'll call up the second panel.
Thank you.
This hearing will be in order. I want to welcome our principal witness from VA, Dr. Michael Peterson, who is the Chief Consultant on Environmental Health for the Strategic Healthcare Group at the Veterans Health Administration. He is accompanied by Dr. Stephen C. Hunt, the National Director for the Post-Deployment Integrated Care Initiative at VHA, and Bradley G. Mays, the Director of the Compensation and Pension Service at the Veterans Benefits Administration. The next witness on the panel is Dr. Craig Postlewaite, Acting Director, Force Health Protection and Readiness Programs, and Director, Force Readiness and Health Assurance at the Department of Defense. Next, we have Dr. Paul Gillooly, who is the Public Health Assessor at Navy Marine Public Health Center. We also have Major General Eugene Payne, Jr., the Assistant Deputy Commandant for Installations and Logistics for Facilities with the Marine Corps. Our final witness on the second panel is John Resta, Scientific Advisor, U.S. Army Center for Health Promotion and Preventive Medicine. I thank you all for being here at this morning at this hearing. Your full testimony will, of course, will appear in the record. Mr. Peterson, will you please begin with your testimony?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss what VA is doing to support veterans with environmental exposures that occurred during military service. As you indicated, I'm accompanied by Dr. Hunt and Mr. Mays this morning. VA recognizes that service members sometimes face exposures to toxicants or materials in the course of their military service that can have deleterious health effects. We have developed a robust program within the Office of Public Health and Environmental Hazards to address this need by identifying potential sources of exposure and at-risk veterans, informing veterans and healthcare providers, and offering treatment and care for service-connected conditions. My written testimony provides background information about initiatives within VA to address these concerns, explains how VA works with DoD to identify and respond to environmental hazards, and describes the 4 specific exposures cited earlier and actions taken by VA in response. I'd like to spend the few minutes I have addressing how VA and DoD collaborate on not just these exposures, but any possible environmental hazard, and how we help veterans receive the health care and benefits they deserve. One of the many lessons that VA has learned from experiences with Agent Orange and Gulf War veterans' illnesses is that information regarding possible exposures to environmental agents and other toxicants, both within the combat theater and other areas in which our troops operate, must be received and acted upon by VA as early as possible. Up-to-date information on these situations is invaluable to VA's ability to identify veterans who may have been affected by an exposure, evaluate their individual risk of exposure, and for sequelae, provide appropriate medical surveillance and mitigate untoward health effects that are known to be caused by these toxicants. In addition, where the possible outcomes are not known, it is important to perform epidemiological studies on exposed troops. This will better provide information than performing retrospective studies once it is determined that adverse health outcomes are being ascribed to a potential exposure. To this end, the joint DoD-VA Deployment Health Working Group was established. This working group reports to the Joint Executive Council through the Health Executive Council. The objective of this group is to identify and foster opportunities for sharing information and resources between VA and DoD in the areas of deployment health surveillance, assessment, follow-up care, health risk communication, and research and development. Each year, this working group discusses deployment-related concerns and develops strategies by which to address them. The Deployment Health Work Group meets monthly to discuss a wide-ranging array of exposure issues, including those dating to the World War II era. The Deployment Health Work Group also actively seeks to discuss and recommend coordinated action to identify and involve service members, establish a determination of risk for this population, and develop methods of outreach, risk communication, and, where necessary, medical surveillance and appropriate health care for veterans with any condition that may have resulted from these exposures. Mr. Chairman, VA understands these issues are very important to you, all the members of this committee, and to veterans and their families. I can assure you VA is equally concerned and committed to working with DoD and other agencies to identify potential hazards, inform veterans of any risks to their health, develop appropriate responses, and deliver needed care and benefits to veterans and their families. Only through such cooperation will VA be prepared to deliver the proper health care and disability compensation benefits to those entitled. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. My colleagues and I are prepared to address any questions you or other committee members might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peterson. The chair calls for a slight recess, and we'll be right back. The hearing will come to order. And now I call for the testimony of Mr. Postlewaite. Dr. Postlewaite.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Department of Defense Occupational Environmental Health Program, our program to assess health risks associated with the environment in our workplaces. I'm Dr. Craig Postlewaite, Acting Director of Force Health Protection and Readiness Programs for the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs. I'm also a veteran with 26 years active duty service. Under my purview is the policy and oversight for the Department's Deployment Health Program. A key component of the Deployment Health Program is our Occupational and Environmental Health Program, or OEH, as I will refer to it. Its goal is to protect our personnel from accidental death, injury, illness caused by hazardous, occupational, or environmental exposures. This includes preventing or minimizing short-term health effects, especially those severe enough to interfere with mission accomplishment, and also any long-term effects that may affect our service members' health and quality of life in the years to follow. To prevent or limit hazardous exposures, both in peacetime and in deployed settings, the Department applies a rigorous risk management program. Mr. Chairman, the Department's many fine OEH professionals take their responsibilities seriously and are fully dedicated to protecting and preserving the health of our personnel by identifying hazards, ascertaining the significance of those health hazards in terms of risk, determining appropriate controls, and communicating the risk information to commanders and affected personnel. Since 2001, our OEH professionals have collected over 17,500 individual environmental samples throughout the U.S. Central Command Theater of Operations, including nearly 10,000 in Iraq, more than 3,500 in Kuwait, and over 3,300 in Afghanistan. In the vast majority of cases, these samples indicate that U.S. personnel are not experiencing any exposures that would put their long-term health at risk. However, with the current technology and under wartime conditions, it is not always possible to monitor the working locations of all service members for all hazards, especially for those who operate outside of our base camps. While our focus continues to remain on exposure prevention and control, we realize that some hazardous exposures can and will occur despite our best efforts. And unfortunately, some individuals may develop short-term or long-term health effects as a result. First and foremost, we want to ensure those affected individuals get the very best care and treatment they are entitled to through the military health system and the VA. Secondly, these fine veterans have our profound sympathies for the pain and suffering they and their families experience. They've earned our sincere gratitude for their service. Our Department of Defense Occupational Environmental Health Instruction, DODI 6055.05, requires DOD to share hazard and exposure data with the VA to assist in the adjudication of veterans' disability claims. Such records also are valuable in establishing diagnosis and proper treatment. To ensure that VA is aware of individual hazardous exposures, all exposure-related information is to be entered into each individual's medical record, so it will be available to the VA at time of treatment or claims adjudication. Once the DoD electronic exposure record becomes a reality, and I discuss that more in my written testimony, hopefully it'll be in the next few years, these will also be made available to the VA. For a number of years, the DoD and VA have collaborated through the DoD and VA Deployment Health Work Group, as Dr. Peterson mentioned. We use that forum to share on a frequent basis information related to exposures. While the Department of Defense's in garrison and deployed OEH programs have been quite effective in identifying and controlling chemical, biological, and physical hazards which our service members or DoD civilians may encounter, we, of course, are fully committed to improving those programs wherever we can. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the DoD's OEH program today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Postlewaite. And now we'll receive the testimony of Dr. Gillooly.
Chairman Akaka, distinguished members of the committee, I'm Dr. Paul Gillooly, representing Navy Medicine. I'm here to discuss Navy Medicine's efforts in evaluating the potential health risks for U.S. Navy personnel and their families living and working at Naval Air Facility Atsugi, Japan, from the operation of the adjacent privately owned Shinkampo Incineration complex referred to as the SIC. It is important to make clear that our role in Navy Medicine is to conduct such studies when tasked and to act as advisors to Navy Line, who as risk managers make the final decisions with regard to implementing new policies or revisions to existing policies in response to potential health threats in these situations. The incinerators were installed first in the early 80s and burned municipal waste. Navy health concerns first arose around 1985 when the incinerator applied for and was granted a license to burn industrial waste. Navy Medicine's involvement began in 1994 and continued through the closing of the incinerator in 2001. Following the closure of the incinerator, we completed a comprehensive health risk assessment report in 2002. Navy Medicine conducted or sponsored 3 human health risk assessments, 3 epidemiological studies, and a medical screening study, all of which underwent high-level external peer review. In addition, we coordinated the execution of a robust health and environmental risk communication plan. The first 2 screening health risk assessments conducted in 94 and 97 raised concerns for both cancer and non-cancer effects from exposure to the incinerator. In October 1997, the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery was tasked by Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Pacific Fleet, to conduct a comprehensive health risk assessment. The most significant results of the comprehensive risk assessment were as follows. The cancer risk for children under the age of 6 living on base for a 3-year tour of duty suggested that a child's exposure to contaminants from air and soil could potentially result in an additional lifetime cancer risk of 1.1 per 10,000. The calculated cancer risk for adults living or working on base for a 3- or 6-year tour of duty suggested that an adult's exposure to contaminants from air and soil falls within the EPA's acceptable cancer risk range of 1 in 10,000 to 1 in a million. We worked closely with EPA throughout the life of this project, and EPA procedures and guidance were used in the development of the sampling plan, collection of the air quality data, quality assurance audits, and procedures and execution of the entire risk assessment methodology. This is an important point in that due to the absence of equivalent regulatory oversight by the government of Japan, the U.S. Navy assumed that role. To ensure that equivalent standard of environmental protection, we were committed to using the accepted and legal risk assessment methodology of the EPA. To respond to NAF Atsugi community concerns, Navy Medicine was given permission to conduct 3 health studies: a children's respiratory health study in 1998, a pregnancy loss or miscarriage study for women at NAF Atsugi also in 1998, and a retrospective cohort study of disease just completed in 2009. There were no significant findings in either the children's respiratory study or the pregnancy loss study. The recently completed retrospective cohort study of disease was designed to determine if the incidence of disease associated with exposure to the emissions from the incinerator significantly differ for residents of NAF Atsugi from 1985 to 2001 when compared to a similar population in Yokosuka over that same time period. The study included over 5,600 active duty and over 11,000 family members in NAF Atsugi former resident cohort and found a significantly higher risk for dermal complaints, a non-cancer health effect, in the Atsugi population when compared to the Yokosuka population. No other area of analysis found significant differences in disease and illness incidents or health complaints. Navy Medicine then requested Battelle Memorial Institute, an external independent private agency, to review all available Navy Atsugi health risk assessment data and make recommendations for possible additional medical screening. Battelle stated, "The conclusion of all previous evaluations are remarkable for their consistency. Residents of NAF Atsugi were exposed to ambient air and soil contaminants due primarily to emissions from the Shinkampo Incinerator complex that were sufficient to produce an incremental increase in lifetime risk of cancer and increase the risk of respiratory non-cancer effects. However, since the incremental risk was relatively small, it would not be scientifically meaningful to provide broad medical screening for all potentially exposed personnel." In April 1998, at the direction of the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, Navy Medicine developed a comprehensive risk communication and health consultation plan. This plan addressed the means for providing information to the community, established procedures for providing formal risk communication to everyone on board NAF Atsugi and personnel negotiating orders to Atsugi, and implemented health consultations and documentation describing the potential exposure conditions at NAF Atsugi. In coordinating with the VA, the primary process followed by DoD and Navy Medicine is to ensure the VA is aware of individual hazardous exposures and that the information is entered into the medical records of those affected so it is available to the VA at the time of treatment or claims adjudication. This process was initiated for NAF Atsugi-based residents beginning around 1995 to 1998 timeframe and continued until the incinerator closed in 2002. In June 2009, following a brief by Navy Medicine, the DoD VA Deployment Health Working Group agreed the VA would receive a list of all effective active duty personnel stationed at NAF Atsugi from 1985 to 2001. This collection of information will aid in any future outreach or surveillance activities for this population as indicated. Presently, Navy Medicine, through the Navy and Marine Corps Public Health Center, has developed a website that provides all publicly available documents related to NAF Atsugi and frequently asked questions section as a means of providing information to former Atsugi residents, their health care providers, and the VA. This website also has a link allowing any VA medical care provider the opportunity to contact a Navy physician directly for any additional information on health issues related to the NAF Atsugi exposures. Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share with you Navy Medicine's efforts in evaluating exposures from the incinerator at NAF Atsugi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gillooly, for your testimony. My first question is for all of the DoD witnesses, and I'm really interested in the timeline for each of the exposures. Dr. Gillooly, can you share the time frame for Atsugi?
Yes, sir. As mentioned in my introductory remarks, the incinerators were constructed in the early 80s. They were burning municipal waste. They applied for a permit to burn industrial waste in 1985. I think those are when the first concerns arose. There were some studies done by other organizations within the Navy, not Navy Medicine, in the late 80s and early 90s. We're not involved in those studies. We were tasked, or asked rather, in 1994 to come in and look at what had been done, and at that point we had done a screening risk assessment. So that's when we first became aware of the air emission problems and wrote a fact sheet and started to begin some risk communication on base at that time. We followed that up in '97 with another screening risk assessment using data that was primarily collected not by us but for compliance purposes. And each time we recommended that we go to a full comprehensive risk a full comprehensive risk assessment study that would involve the year-long study of the air pollutants. In other words, you would sample for the whole year. As you're aware, the Department of Justice filed suit, I believe in '99, 2000, against the incinerator complex, and it was closed in 2001.
When was your VA partners notified about this, or the other service members?
Pardon? Could you repeat that, please? I didn't hear that. When was?
Yes. When was this information passed on to VA?
Well, to my understanding, this year, in fact, there was a formal presentation to the VA about the Atsugi retrospective cohort epidemiological studies. So I think, to my knowledge, that's the first formal presentation to the VA.
Dr. Peterson, what happens when information about exposures arrives at VA's doorsteps? And Dr. Hunt, how do you begin to assess the health of a veteran who has served in an area where an exposure is known to have occurred?
Mr. Chairman, I would reference back to my earlier opening statement about the DoD VA Deployment Health Work Group. And as other witnesses have explained on the DoD side, that has become the venue in the last few years of both discussions related to exposures and a venue for the transfer of information to include things like lists of potentially people exposed. When through that working group the VA is notified, we have a discussion with others at the health work group and internally to VA concerning the appropriate course of action. What do we feel based on work done by DoD up to that particular period of time in terms of exposure? How much of a risk is there? We identify methods by which to communicate with both veterans and providers that the exposure has occurred and what they need to be concerned about from a provider's perspective, from the perspective of care. And where necessary, we begin to conduct medical surveillance and provide appropriate health care as authorized under statutory authority. I think Dr. Hunt can provide us a very interesting perspective in terms of what you've asked him to do and also to kind of balance out what I said in terms of when that information is provided to our providers in the field and veterans are aware and come in asking questions, how those questions are addressed and how the care is handled at that point. So I'll ask Dr. Hunt to address that.
Dr. Hunt.
First, I would like to thank the chairman and ranking member for the invitation to come speak with you today, as well as the staffers. I commend you on the work that you're doing. I feel like I'm sitting here with 3,000, 3,500 veterans that I've seen over the years. I'm a primary care physician, occupational environmental medicine trained, and have done many hundreds of Gulf War registry exams, Agent Orange exams, Project Shad exams, ionizing radiation exams. And I've sat with many of these veterans and feel like I will try to represent today their needs and their experiences. I can't get the stories out of my head that Stacy told today and Laurie and Russell. I think of Senator Burr's friends, Jerry and David. Day in and day out, I sit with these individuals that have concerns about environmental agent exposures. I feel like there are two very important kind of paths that these situations take. If we have a situation like Qarmat Ali, Camp Lejeune, where we have what seem to be fairly clear exposure incidents, I feel like we're putting in place, both through the work in the DoD and CHIPM and the Office of Public Health and Environmental Hazards, with our risk centers, a very nice approach that I wish Senator Rockefeller was still here, because it's still not where we want it to be, but we are really moving in the direction of being able to take care of these incidents in a way that is more quickly provides relief for these veterans and their families. Many of the people that we see, and I think of Senator Burr's comments, that situations where we still don't have the answer, or situations where we're waiting for science. Tuesday, going to clinic, I ran into a Gulf War veteran that I hadn't seen for 6 or 7 years. I'd done his initial Gulf War registry exam back in 94, 95. Hadn't seen him for a long time. He was doing great. He'd been down to Florida. He's been seen in a VA down there. We had a short chance to talk, and I thought, he's really doing well, this fellow. When he first came in, he had medically unexplained symptoms, as 20% of the veterans from the first Gulf War did. We still don't know exactly what that's about. We still don't fully understand it. But what we do know is that there are many things we can do to help these veterans before we fully understand everything that's going on in terms of direct associations between exposures and health problems. So I guess to answer your question, what we try to do when a veteran comes in is to, first of all, acknowledge their service, acknowledge their sacrifice, take a step back from the chief concern about the exposure and the health concerns and reassure them that we'll be spending time on that, but to take a step back and look at the greater context of their needs and their situation, particularly combat veterans. These exposures in combat particularly are part of a very complex matrix of exposures that have to do with environmental agents and psychological traumas and sleep deprivation and all the other potentially deleterious experiences a person has in combat. So we try to assess kind of the full spectrum of risk that this person has been exposed to. We try to put the assessment of their environmental exposures in the context of that overall risk. We try to get the services set up that they need, including getting them service connected, getting them benefits, getting them the support that they need, so that even before we know the answers to is this particular symptom related to this particular exposure, there are a lot of things we can do to help them get back on track and get back on their feet, particularly combat veterans.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Senator Burr, for your questions.
Dr. Gillooly.
We concur with that, sir.
Thank you, sir. Why was I take for granted, you're the Public Health Center.
Yes, sir. Navy Marine
Did
Corps
that
Public
used to
Health
be
Center.
called the Navy Environmental Health Center?
Yes, sir.
So you've changed your name?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I just want to make sure I asked the right person the right question. Why was NRC not asked to review a broader set of risk?
We had the NRC review our previous two screening health risk assessments in 95 and 97. They more or less agreed with our findings and conclusions for those.
Well, the 2000 draft that they reviewed, they found, they raised several questions. How did you incorporate into the final rule what they raised?
Yes, sir. We took their recommendations seriously. We worked approximately 6 more months just working those issues, incorporating where we could their primary issues about reducing the uncertainty and better characterization of the health risks. We provided to them a 100-page report that listed point by point which of those items we could actually do that were practicable at that point in time, and they were included in the final report.
But several of the issues were structural problems with the way you conducted your analysis throughout the thing. I'm not sure how you could go back and remediate that unless it was to guess.
Well, I think I should back up. Number one is when we first asked the National Research Council, to look at the report, typically you have an opportunity to discuss with them what you intend to do on site, and we were not able to because the Department of Justice had litigation ongoing. So issues such as challenges and limitations of trying to do a risk assessment overseas from a source that was privately owned outside the fence were very real. For example, the gold standard would be to get on that stack, that incinerator stack, and measure the pollution coming out of the stack.
Yeah,
we
but
could not do that.
Adopting that rationale would tell me that you would lean heavier on a contractor versus a DoD arm to actually conduct more of the study.
Well, it's a team approach. We had both contractors
Okay.
and
Why would the NRC not be asked to look at the final report before it was published?
well, all I can tell you is the Navy Bureau of Medicine and Surgery forwarded the final draft report to the Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Pacific Fleet, for release. What happened after that, I can't comment on. In fact, I was surprised today when Dr. Feigley indicated he'd not seen that. So,
Mr. Chairman, I've got a ton more questions. I'd like unanimous consent to be able to provide written questions and to get answers because, one, we've been here a long time, and I know you've got things to do. These witnesses have been here for a long time, but I do want to make one observation.
Yes, Senator Burr, I have some questions.
Okay, okay. May I make one observation?
Send them for the record.
This committee has struggled to try to make seamless the handoff of active duty troops to our Veterans Administration from a standpoint of the health care needs of our veterans. Today, I've come to the conclusion that our problem is far worse than just working with DoD on the electronic medical records, so that this is a seamless process where when you go into a new healthcare system, they know exactly what you've been exposed to, they know exactly where you've been, they can assess what your health needs are based upon where you've served and what you might have been exposed to. Today I found that it's much worse, because even where we identify things that potentially could cause long-term health conditions to our active duty, reserved, and called up guard, there's not an attempt to download that information to where we know these individuals will be at some point receiving their health care. And I sort of paint everybody on one side, and I also paint everybody on the VA side for not screaming about the need to get this information. We've made tremendous progress between VA and DoD to try to get medical electronics records that are seamless. If in fact exposure to burn pits has some potential downstream effect, then I want to make sure a VA doctor knows exactly where that person was, so that they can see them and treat them based upon what their exposure might be. If they were at Camp Lejeune for those years, that is absolutely essential to the VA side to take care of them. If they were exposed to an incinerator, and that really doesn't matter what the conclusion of the report was, that's pertinent information to a medical doctor who's making a decision about an individual based upon what he sees and what he reads. And if he only has what he sees, the care cannot be as complete as if he matches that with what he reads. So I would hope on both sides of this table at the VA, we become proactive at asking for the information that's pertinent to delivering care to these warriors. On the active duty side, that we understand this is not about minimizing the potential effects of what we're in charge of. It's making sure that we get the most pertinent information to all the people that can affect the best quality of life long term for the individuals that may or may not have been affected. Again, I thank all of you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Burr. This has been a great hearing. In closing, I again want to thank all of our witnesses for appearing today and for your responses as well. To the veterans and family members of veterans affected by the exposures discussed today, I truly appreciate your willingness to share your stories with the committee. Understand that these deeply personal matters are sensitive and not always easy to speak so freely about. As chairman, I am committed to ensuring that VA continues to study the health effects related to these exposures, and that VA adapts to meet the treatment needs of individuals affected by toxic exposures. As I mentioned in my opening statement, in order for VA to do this, DoD must first determine who was exposed and what they were exposed to, and the health consequences of such exposure. The information must then be shared with VA. This committee is not charged with direct oversight of DoD that falls to the Armed Services Committee. However, this committee shares responsibility for oversight where the roles of DoD and VA intersect, and we share several members, including me and Senator Burr. To quote President Obama, we cannot let burn pits and other exposures be this generation's Agent Orange. We have a responsibility to ensure that the newest era of veterans receive the highest quality of care and prevent the tragic stories we have heard today from happening again. And I thank you again for sharing your comments and thoughts. And without question, it's going to be helpful to what we're trying to do to help the veterans of our country. This hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.